Rome had conquered the Mediterranean. Its legions were disciplined, fearless, and seemed utterly unstoppable. But even the mightiest armies have their limits, and in 53 BC, one of the greatest miscalculations in Roman history would prove just that. Meet Marcus Licinius Crassus. He was one of Rome's richest and most powerful men, a member of the first triumvirate alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. While Caesar was conquering Gaul and Pompey was defeating kings in the east, Crassus felt left out. He had immense wealth and political influence, but what he truly craved was military glory, the kind that would echo through eternity. He wanted a legacy to rival his peers. So he set his sights on Parthia, a vast and powerful empire to the east. Conquering Parthia would not only bring him immense riches but also the battlefield triumph he desperately needed. It was a bold, ambitious plan. With the Senate's reluctant approval, Crassus assembled a massive army of nearly 40,000 soldiers, 7 legions of Rome's finest, along with cavalry and auxiliary troops. These were men trained for close-quarters combat, masters of the tight, disciplined formations that had crushed countless enemies. They were a walking fortress of steel and resolve. As Crassus marched his army east into Syria, the warnings began. His own officers, experienced commanders, urged caution. Local allies, who knew the terrain and the enemy, advised him to stick to the riverbanks, where his legions would have water, and their flanks would be protected. They were masters of the horse and bow, a storm of mobile cavalry that struck from a distance and vanished like a mirage. But Crassus was blinded by arrogance. He dismissed the advice. Why would he, a Roman general leading the world's greatest army, listen to local chieftains? His confidence in the legionary system was absolute. He believed Roman discipline could overcome any obstacle, any enemy, any terrain. The march was grueling. The sun was relentless. The heat was suffocating, and water was scarce. The heavy armor that protected the legionaries in European forests became a sweltering prison in the desert. Morale began to drop. And then, near a small town called Carrhae, they finally met the Parthian army. It was nothing like what the Romans expected. There was no grand line of battle, no infantry waiting to be charged. Instead, they saw a swirling sea of horsemen. At their head was a brilliant young general named Surena. The Parthian force was smaller than the Roman one, but it was composed almost entirely of cavalry, lightly armored horse archers and heavily armored cataphracts, the tanks of the ancient world. The Romans formed their classic defensive square, a wall of shields and spears ready to repel a charge. But the charge never came. Instead, the Parthian horse archers began to circle the Roman formation, staying just out of reach of their javelins. Then the air filled with a sound like a terrifying hiss, and the sky darkened. It was the sound of thousands upon thousands of arrows. The Parthian arrows were uniquely designed. They were heavy, sharp, and could pierce Roman shields and armor. The legionaries locked their shields together in the famous testudo formation, creating a tortoise-like shell, but the barrage was relentless. The Parthians didn't run out of arrows. Surena had organized a massive supply train of camels, each loaded with fresh quivers. As one group of archers emptied their supply, they would ride back, rearm, and return to the fight. It was a continuous, unending storm of death. The Romans were trapped. If they stood still, they were pincushions. If they tried to advance, the Parthians would simply retreat, firing as they went, luring them further into the open. Roman discipline, their greatest strength, was now their biggest weakness. Crassus grew desperate. He saw his army being slowly bled dry without even getting to fight. He made a fateful decision. He ordered his son, Publius Crassus, a brave and capable commander, to take a large contingent of cavalry and infantry and charge the Parthians, to break their encirclement. Publius and his men surged forward, full of hope. The Parthians, seeing the charge, turned and fled. The Romans, believing they had finally broken the enemy, gave chase. But it was a trap. They were lured far away from the main army, deep into the desert. Suddenly the fleeing Parthians turned. The heavily armored cataphracts crashed into the Roman lines, while the horse archers swarmed around their flanks, cutting off their retreat. They fought bravely to the last man, but there was no escape. Publius, rather than face capture, chose to take his own life. The Parthians cut off his head and mounted it on a spear. Back at the main Roman square, the soldiers waited anxiously for news. Their hope turned to horror when they saw a group of Parthian riders approach, not to fight, but to deliver a message. They paraded Publius's severed head before the horrified eyes of his father and the entire army. Roman morale shattered. The discipline that had held them together for so long finally broke. The day ended in disaster, but the night brought no relief. Under the cover of darkness, Crassus tried to organize a retreat, but his army was in chaos. Thousands of wounded were left behind, their cries echoing through the desert night. The retreat was a nightmare, with Parthian forces harassing them every step of the way. Finally, Crassus was tricked into a meeting to negotiate a truce. Of the nearly 40,000 men who had marched into the desert with dreams of glory, an estimated 20,000 were killed, and another 10,000 were captured, many of whom would end their days as slaves on the far eastern frontier of the Parthian Empire. Only a quarter of the army managed to escape. The Battle of Carrhae was more than just a military defeat. It was a psychological blow to Rome. The invincible legions had been humiliated. The golden Roman eagles, their sacred standards, were captured by the Parthians, a disgrace that would haunt Rome for decades. The consequences were far-reaching. Crassus's death destroyed the balance of power in the first triumvirate, removing the buffer between Caesar and Pompey and paving the way for the civil war that would ultimately end the Roman Republic. Carrhae taught Rome a harsh lesson, that overconfidence is a killer, and that no army, no matter how powerful, is invincible. They had underestimated their enemy, ignored sound advice, and failed to adapt their tactics to a new kind of warfare. The Parthians, with their brilliant strategy, use of terrain, and superior mobility, had proven that clever tactics could defeat brute force. The story of Carrhae is a timeless reminder that pride often comes before a fall, and that the greatest mistake in war is to believe you've already won. It is a powerful chapter in history that shows how one man's ambition and one terrible miscalculation can lead to a catastrophe of epic proportions. We have many more battles, turning points, and incredible historical tales coming your way.